Thanks for staying with us. You're watching Standpoint. We're looking at the planned nationwide protest, and we're also analyzing the president's economic policies, which many say has led us to this point. But the president is saying, look, those reforms are good reforms. Nigerians just need to be patient to see the benefits and the results. We've been speaking with the security and defense consultant and the CEO, Aquilin Intelligence, who is also an economist, by the way, Oyekachi Adekoya. He's with us in the studio. And we also have development policy scholar, Dr. Jalili Adebi, also with us in the studio. And then a lecturer at Department of Economics at the Michael Okpara University of Agriculture, Modike, Dr. Chukwuma Ogbonna, who is joining us via Zoom. Thank you all for staying with us. Let me get to you. I know you wanted to react to what the Dr. Ogbonna was saying.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I work with a number of stakeholders in the country, and one of those are farmers. So when the policy was implemented by the president, the removal of the subsidy, I started tracking my farmers to find out how it was affecting their situation. Within the first 4 months, I communicated with trusted friends within the government that Nigerians will experience food insecurity, never like before. They called me a prophet of doom. And I said, it's a matter of time before this becomes validated, and it did happen. And I'll give one of the insights, how I got to know this. When you look at the way the farmers operate, they source their labor. Some of them will come from Benue. They call them the Igede farmers. Some of them will come from Benin Republic. During the time of insurgency, we had a drop in the number of farm workers coming from Benin Republic. We were able to source them locally. And that is to increase the cost of keeping laborers on farms in Nigeria. As soon as the subsidy was removed, there was a subsisting agreement that if this labor worked for me during the growing season, they immediately require for what they call a shaba, Okada. Okada as at then was around 320,000 naira. And you've signed this agreement at the beginning of the growing season. When the subsidy was removed, the price of Ashaba rose to 1 million naira. Okada. And you got to pay. And there was no way the farmers could break out of that agreement. They were forced to pay. And that was why, after they paid, that affected their profit. And they equally have to pass the cost of the sales of their produce to the consumers. It's part of the cost of production. It goes into the determination of the pricing of their produce in the market. After that cycle, another thing happened. And what we are expecting in October, November is going to be worse. It's not a prophet of doom. We are talking about reality, following data. And I want government to be following data. When government is talking, let them talk data. We must interrogate their data. I don't want to listen to government officials. Communities are going to improve. Where is the data? Government is all about data. Policy is all about data. That is what we do as scholars. We've been collecting this data. 2 things have happened to farmers. One, their available disposable capital. Most of them, they have to spend it on internal family matters. That affected the amount of land they put into cultivation. Amount of land put into cultivation will automatically affect the number of produce they are harvesting. Second thing, many of them were not able to hire labor because they couldn't pay for a shaba of 1.5 million, or kind of 1.5 million. And at the end of the day, what they are doing is to cultivate the little they can use to feed their family.
And that's even after the previous government has said that, look,
and that is why
they had done the anchors.
Yeah, and that is why you now come back to the policy. I want to come back to that leverage point. The way you know that that policy that they implemented is a leverage point. Because in system thinking, when we say something is a leverage point, what that means is that one thing, if you do it, it has a cascading effect that will affect every single functionality in that system, either positively or negatively. Anytime you get that kind of feedback, then you know that you got to do something differently.
All right.
And that is what we're experiencing with this fuel subsidy removal, in a way that it has exacerbated the cost of living in all facets of livelihood.
Right. As we so I need to share the conversation with Mr. Adekoya. Yes. I mean, you've also listened to him. But the government has mentioned about 3 or 4 things it has done that it feels that maybe in the next few months, 1 year max, maybe things would look different for Nigerians. And one of them, they've talked about the student loans. They've talked about the minimum wage. They've also talked about the local government autonomy, which they feel that if there is a proper governance at that level, Nigerians would not complain. And then I think there is a fourth one. I'm going to find it. I think it's the loan transfer or so, but I'm going to find the fourth. But some of the things they've mentioned. But when you look at those 4 indexes of this particular administration, what do you make of it? Does it have a real-time impact, on Nigerians, and that in a way that in the coming months things would at least return to maybe not normal, but at least better than what it is now?
Yeah. So for the purposes of educating our listeners and Nigerians out there, I want to profoundly and respectfully disagree with Dr. Adebisi when he talks about about data. I would also ask, what data is he looking at? And I'll tell you why. We support a number of NGOs, developmental organizations, operating in the different local governments across the country. I just returned from Kano and Katsina, where I also journeyed by road, interestingly, between Kano and Katsina. Every day, we issue our field travel authorization support to implementing partners for different development organizations operating across this country. So we have our teeth in different parts of the country. So I should be able to know some of the things going on the ground. Yes, it's true that cost has gone up, but what Dr. Adebi is perhaps mixing up a bit is the subsidy removal and the FX liberalization. What he's pointing to is that Nigeria tried for once to do too many things at the same time. And that convoluted that shock threw the economy into some kind of...
is that a point that you also agree with?
I agree that, to my point, subsidy removal was a no-brainer. It had to be done, and it was done. I may take the next 4 hours to explain to you. Some of these people importing were frustrated with the amount of money they were making from the subsidy by their own confessions, on record, where they said, listen, they fleece the country enough. There are people who bring tankers in, they sign paper that they bring it in, they take it back. All we do is just sign paper and we pay. There's PEF, there's Petroleum Equalization Fund, which means that if you buy petrol at 568 NNPC in Lagos, you should buy it at 568 NNPC in Maiduguri. There are people who collect products, sign papers that they are trucking to Sokoto, they sell outside the depot, they fill the paper for PEF, government pays it, and still people are buying products expensive. So it's a funny thing. Okay? I'm just talking to myself.
It's fine.
So this thing about subsidy, no brainer, should have been removed. The point Dr. Chukwuma was making was that, hey, Port Harcourt refinery, Kaduna refinery should have been up. They've been telling us it will be up, it will be up, it will be up. We've been contacted by some different foreign organizations to also do some checks on some of these local refinery operators in Nigeria to check about their validity and as to when they will operate. So when the NNDPRA came out and said Dangote is operating at 45%, again, it's not far from what people know. It was at the wet phase of the refinery also coming up. So there are a number of issues. Dangote will not solve our problem. We can't tie the economy to a single source. That creates energy risk. It creates a concentration risk. So to Dr. Chukwuma's point, yes, Port Harcourt refinery should come in, Kaduna refinery should come in. Dangote, who has built the whole foray, the issues between NNPC and Dangote was primarily because NNPC offered and guaranteed stock for which it will use to pay its own share of the percentage you wanted to own in Dangote. The federal government changed the policy, removed FX transfer directly to NNPC, domiciled it in CBN, incapacitated NNPC from its commitment. NNPC could not go forward with that agreement, leaving Dangote in a bit of a limbo on how to get the stock upon which it made its projections. And I'm thinking, if you run that size of refinery, you must also look at your risk. In a policy environment where you have a lot of inconsistencies as Nigeria, you can't predicate a 650,000 barrel per day refinery on a single source. You had concentration risk. So Dangote is the issues are neither here nor there. So doctor seems to be mixing up the issue of subsidy removal with the FX. Across the world, in the US and UK, the price of energy is going up. But what is shocking us is correctly the point he's making, food inflation. What is causing food inflation? I've been hammering from the security side that look at where ISWAP, Boko Haram, and Saru, the bandits, look at where they are operating. In the regions that are food belts. Forget the other noise that we're hearing. Nigeria is under an asymmetric attack. Because these people are operating Benue, Niger, Kaduna, Jos. In the Northeast had the largest head of cattle anywhere in the world. In Africa, at least. Held up in the Northeast. Now you have ISWAP. They can't head cattle there. There's cattle rustling in the Northwest. There are issues around banditry there. So everybody bringing their cattle towards the North Central where they feel is safer. That creates header-farmer clashes within the North Central coming down towards the Southwest. And the space to farm is being impacted. People can't go to their farm. In some communities in the Northwest, they have to pay Ansaru to protect them from bandits. So this systemic attack, what is at stake here? If you say Nigeria is the most populous black nation on earth, 220 million people growing, if a nation cannot feed itself, the people protesting are not necessarily protesting these other issues. They are protesting food inflation. The key thing is that food has become increasingly expensive. And I agree with Dr. Adebi that the food crisis we face will not be resolved overnight. A lot of communities are going back to their farms. At least I can tell you for free. Some of us are on the roads every day. So farming is going back. But there has to be more effort to address the issue of food inflation
and that's why I want to bring in Dr. Gbuna, because I also want us to look at the security end of this, you know, with statement coming from the security agencies. But let me bring in Dr. Gbuna. I mean, you've heard about food inflation. The headline inflation is also high. What should be the priority for the government at this moment in terms of dealing with this? Because dealing with this, especially food inflation, people can wake up one day and, you know, beans is, for, you know, hypothetically 500 naira, and then before you know it, the next day is 1,000 naira. And that's where people are really frustrated, when you cannot predict, you know, what the market, you know, would look like the next day. Because we used to be able to predict it, but now we cannot. And sometimes it's like 3 times the price when you go to the market.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a listening president. He has done something to this regard by approving the importation of food, which I believe is for the short run. Farmers are going back. It will take some time for the produce to mature and, you know, come to the market. So in the interim, the food import will cushion the effect, bring back the economy to a steady state or equilibrium. So that policy, I believe, will take care of the inflation.
But what other policies should be put in place beyond just food? I know you've been talking about the refinery. A lot of people would say this administration is pursuing a lot of things, and we've seen some, you know, things also reversed. But what should be, because there are some people who feel, you know, he was talking about the cascading effect, that if you take care of one thing, perhaps it will have impacts on all other things. And so what should that thing be, and what should be the priority?
Now, if you look at one other policy in place is the fiscal policy and tax reform, where they are looking at the taxes and trying to apply the canon of taxation with simplicity, convenience, equity, and those things. So by the time you reduce the tax burden on the populace, they will have more money in their pocket, spend on other things. Then looking at the electricity tariff, that's another very good policy the government brought in place. We are or categorizing consumers in bands. Those who have the high income earners will pay more, while the lower income will pay less.
But if you're a business person, Dr. Gbuna, if you're a business person who lives in a Band E area, for example, and you're receiving maybe five hours of light a day, and your business requires power, hasn't that also impoverished you in a way? Because if you're selling frozen food, for example, and you don't get, because sometimes people don't even get the number of hours that has been promised them, doesn't that already impoverish you? Because the business that you are depending on, to feed yourself also depends on light that you're not getting. Is that a good policy in itself?
Sorry. The challenge we have now is transmission and generation. So if more power can be generated and government expands the transmission, lines and meters everybody, all persons will have adequate light to do whatever he wants to do. So in summary of all these things, these policies, there are lacks in policies. So it will take time before we begin to, not too much time, but very, very soon, we'll begin to see the manifestation of this policy by the president.
All right, so let me come to Dr. Adebi before, as we begin to, wind down the conversation. I know you want to respond to Dr. Bona's statement, but I would give you a minute to do that. But I also wanted to speak to this as we turn to security, security side of this matter. You've listened to the IGP saying we need to see, for the protesters, that they need to see the measures being put in place by the protesters to ensure that, their ranks will not be infiltrated by, high hoodlums, and miscreants, and then hijacking that protest. You were a student union leader back in the days, and you led protest. What do you make of that?
Yeah, thank you so much. Before I dive into that question, about the issue of food insecurity, it's a complicated issue. We have many dimensions of food insecurity. We have the food access, we have the food availability, we have the food stability, and we have the assimilation component. The policy that we have implemented struck every single thing in negative direction. When you talk about availability, it's about so many things. What is coming from the farm, what you get in the market. Availability does not equally equate affordability. Affordability is part of access. There was an Uber driver that I took, and I speak with him. He said, bros, I said, how do you feed yourself? He said, it used to be 1,500 naira per meal. He said, with the situation of things, and having to keep with the payment of the car he's using for Uber, he got to cut things down to 500 naira per meal. In that situation, it means that he's having the issue of affordability. And that affordability comes back to our policy as impaired his earning power and disposable capital. And that is why that policy, one of the things we need to go and refuse, and I trust that Chuaju will listen to some of us. He needs to refuse the policy. We'll come back to that, and that's another, that can be an entire conversation on its own. And when it comes to the protests, one, I believe Mr. President is not saying that they should not have the protest. Because first, it's a creation of protest himself. The personality called Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu is a creation of protest. Everything about him. He protested decisions he was never satisfied with. He protested military oligarchy, autocracy. He did all of this. He even protested in our own democracy. And one of the things he did during the democratic era was to ensure that the protests were successful. And I experienced this when I led student protests. One, every single time I led a protest, I always remember there were protests that went chaotic at the University of Lagos. I have my own insiders, my trusted allies. They are directors of companies now. I will hold a meeting with them before we go to protest. I want you to provide security. We know all the major places where chaos can come in when we lead a protest. My guys will be on guard to monitor it. This is what I expect the government to be discussing with the protesters. What are the measures you are putting in place to ensure that
what the IGP has
but now the way the government is making it look, making it appear, they make it look like a big deal. They invite this imam today, they invite another pastor
so
come tomorrow.
Let me share the conversation. We have just about 5 minutes or even less than that left. You know, this is your tough. Again, being an economist turned security expert. Speak to us about this. Government has talked about foreign mercenaries. They've talked about, intelligence of people who are planning to disrupt the nation. They've asked the protesters to provide measures. And people are wondering, this is should be the job of the security and not necessarily the protesters. But what do you make of it?
In terms of the security statistics, the security situation, surprisingly, is not abating. The numbers of fatalities yet to date, if you compare with 2023, even as at this date, we are trending higher than 2023. And in terms of the incident count, surprisingly also, there's been an uptick in IEDs, issues of IEDs in the Northeast. There were some issues in Ngala yesterday. There were some issues picked up in Maiduguri. Again, so let me speak to security. Because the previous administration had considerably decimated both the armed bandits and ISWAP and Boko Haram, some of these elements are now resorting to blackmail, as it were, opportunistic attack. They now have the Boko Haram faction. There's one that is led by Bakura. There's another one led by, I've forgotten the guy's name, who announced sometime in August that they begin to deploy IEDs. So we're seeing an increase in. So some of that will make people think that the matter is still there, but it's really not there. Some of those issues are going down because if you listen to Ndume, former chief Senate whip, a lot of farmers are being resettled. So there's some progress, but the population of Nigeria is increasing every year. The dynamics also are becoming a bit more fluid every year. It's hydra-headed. So I don't take it out of place as a security person when I see government exercise caution. We usually say in language, out of an abundance of caution, the government is bound to take some of these steps. Why? Because in the world today, there is now what you call a protest culture. Europe, people are protesting. In the UK, in Leeds, in London, the other day, protests. In Bangladesh, there's been massive protests. In Kenya.
Even in France.
Even in France also, there are still the throes of protests. And what happens is that a peaceful protest can quickly devolve into a mob. And then you go from civil, public protest to civil disorder, civil disobedience. And then you break down law and order. So government is within its rights to be sounding the note of caution, as the protesters are within their rights to a peaceful protest.
But if you just provide, I have about 30 seconds left.
Yes, let me just make it.
If you just provide security, some say, look, if you just go there to de-escalate, provide the security, you are bound to have a peaceful protest.
It is not enough. Note the language in the text of the DSS. They have made provisions to charge people with treason because they've said some elements within the protest are seeking to destabilize the government and throw Nigeria into a chaos. And that in pursuit of the integrity of Nigeria, pursuit of the constitutional powers given to them, they may resort to force depending on the scenario that evolve. So that's also a note of caution. Government is doing what it should do. The protesters should do what they need to do, but they should do it peacefully.
All right. We do have to go. I know that everyone wants to contribute. Dr. Gbona, my apologies for not getting your final word on this, but I've been told that we have to go. Security and Defense Consultant and CEO Aquilane Intelligence, Oyekachi Adekoya, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Development Policy Scholar, Dr. Jalili Adebiyi, thank you so much for your time. And our lecturer